Arthur is a licensed clinical social worker who's been practicing for 17 years, and here he shares some of the common patterns and psychological problems and traumas in his clients that he's noticed and how he helps guide them through these to live happier lives. Arthur McGrath, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you speaking with me today.
Sure. Thank you for being interested.
Yeah, of course. You're a clinical psychologist. I'm wondering how long you've been practicing.
So I'm a licensed clinical social worker,
Okay,
um, and I've been practicing since '06.
beautiful. Um, has COVID changed how you are seeing patients? Are you doing more virtual now?
Um, I did a fair amount of virtual, but I went back into my office in June of 2020, and followed the air guidelines. So I had a big filter pushing fresh air into the office and a big HEPA filter filtering the air in the office. So, and I would say about half people were coming then, and now I have some. I'm not a fan of virtual therapy for my. I don't like doing it virtually.
Mhm.
I do it because if I need to, but I'm not a fan of it. 80% of the information that comes into our brain is out of our awareness, and we don't even understand that yet that well. And I think if we're not in the room with somebody, we're probably losing some important stuff.
Yeah,
So
I would agree. In person's definitely better. You said air filtration. Was that mandated?
no, I wanted to get a safe way to go back in the office, and the material I read said that one of the best things to do is be sure there's a lot of fresh air coming in to dilute any viruses,
Hmm.
and then have a HEPA filter to screen out whatever is there.
Okay, that's
So I
cool.
kept the HEPA filter, and I still do, between me and the whoever I'm seeing.
Nice. Do you feel like that made them feel safer?
That made me feel safer,
Okay, that's good.
and they felt safer too. That there was a system there.
Yeah,
It was more important in the beginning. Because everybody was so nervous about who was going to contaminate who. So people would call me and tell me, I tested positive, so I can't come in. So then we would do a virtual session.
were there people that you started doing virtual sessions with during COVID that you've continued since then?
Yes, I have some people. I have a very few, but I'm not sure, more than one or two that I never met in person.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Um, how often is the average time in between sessions for your clients?
I have a lot of people that come twice a week. Um, Most come once a week, and some come, a couple times a month.
What do you feel like is the best frequency?
It really depends on, the what the person wants to work on and what's going on with them.
That's fair.
One of the main things I work on is something called developmental trauma, which is um, basically what happened to children while they were in that sort of 0 to 10 phase of their life, and how it impacts them. So those people in particular tend to come twice a week.
Okay. Maybe with more serious trauma from that time period.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I've heard before if a person does not want to be in therapy, it's much more difficult to help them. Would you agree with that? And
Oh,
why?
yeah, yeah. Well, I don't see anybody that. Well, I shouldn't say never. I rarely see people who are coming because they're compelled to.
Hmm.
I mean, I had somebody once that they became compelled to come, and then they were no longer compelled to come, and then they continued to come after that.
Because they wanted to.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And obviously they were gonna have better results after they've decided that they want to be there for themselves.
yeah, yeah. The compelling comes up mostly with court mandated, and often could be related to either violence or substance abuse, or that kind of thing, where there's some kind of court order.
Yeah. And I imagine it's more difficult to get positive results in those situations.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because this when you're working on childhood trauma, it takes a lot of courage to look at some of this stuff. And so if you don't have courage and you don't have motivation, we're not going to get too far.
Yeah. Especially if you're guarded.
Right.
So I know there's a lot of different like philosophies and concepts in the world of psychology. I'm wondering if there may be a lens that you prefer to look at things through, or maybe a few lenses, and how you find it helpful to use those to help people understand and solve their problems.
Well, increasingly developmental trauma is my main lens.
Okay.
Um, and you could say, well, that's kind of limited, but the way I look at it is the neurobiology that we're learning about. First of all, 20 years ago, they believed that our brain was not, once we grew up and we're adults, we're stuck with that brain. So 20 years ago is like nothing in the time of medicine. So the idea that the brain could change launched a bunch of new treatment modalities. And so I've come to believe that the main problem for mental health in the United States, and really probably most places, is what an author calls the fear-driven brain. And when we're born, we only need two things. And, obviously we need food and all that, but the two main things we need other than that is connection and safety. And when I say connection, I mean somebody that cares about us and loves us, generally a mother, but it could be a father, a caretaker. And what what happens to a lot of people is they are developing, the brain like almost quadruples in size from 0 to 6, or about 5, 4 or 5. And whatever the brain isn't getting that it needs, or is getting that it doesn't need, it has to adapt to that. And so it wires up to that. And then that wiring comes into adulthood with the person. So, and sometimes that deficits, whatever they might have been, are not necessarily a reflection of what the parents did to them or didn't do to them. It was that they didn't get what they needed for their optimum development. So a lot of people hear that as, well, my parents gave me everything, and what do I have to complain about? Lots of people will say that. But there were some, things that didn't happen for them. And as a result, they have adult challenges, and they could be in the area of depression or anxiety. So the main thing that can happen is what we sort of call hypervigilance, that there's danger around me. The world is dangerous. And people wouldn't say that. That's the anxiety. The anxiety is an emotion that evolved inside us to tell us that there's danger. And then it pushes us into fight or flight. I don't know. Does that make sense?
No, that's great. And you said a couple times that people didn't get what they need, and that's what kind of started that. Can you give me some examples of what people need that they often don't get?
Well, the thing that seems like not that big of a deal, but is coming to be understood as a really big deal, and that is regular and dependable love or attention. So it's not like the parent has to be there all the time, but the parent needs to be there regularly in a way that's expected with a sort of love and affection,
Consistency.
consistency. And that is often not there. If you look around at our world with both parents working or single mothers, um, that doesn't happen a lot.
And what happens when that's not there?
Well, you get an adaptation of could be something like, I can't trust people, people aren't there for me, oh, there's something wrong with me, I'm not good enough. Um, you know, those
Yeah.
kinds of negative self-beliefs
Hmm.
are actually wired into the brain. And the good news is they can be changed, but it takes a lot of work. And a lot of people, especially men, don't like to look at these issues.
Why do you think it's more men than women?
Well, men have different brains from women. Men's brains are designed for fine motor coordination.
Hmm.
Women's brains are designed for nurturing. That's sort of evolutionary biology.
Hmm.
And that makes sense. If you're not good at nurturing, your offspring won't survive. And if you're not good at hunting, your genes won't get reproduced.
Yeah, makes sense. How does that help correlate to them having difficulty solving those problems?
Well, the male brain is not really wired for emotional intuition, emotional intelligence in the way women's are.
Hmm.
And this is a big problem. I see it all the time, and I'm sure you see it. It's like men and women are sometimes speaking different languages.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's a whole, movement that men and women are the same. I'm not sure what that means, but we have very different brains. And
Yeah.
there was a research study in 2013 that looked at 1,000 brains, half male, half female,
Hmm.
made an average picture of each one of them of how the wiring is. And when I saw the difference between the wiring in the male and the female brain, I said, how the hell are we functioning as men with this?
Hmm.
So,
It reminds me of a book. Have you ever heard of Men? I think it's Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's pretty much what the entire book is about how the men and women are wired differently, and
yeah,
how we have different needs, and we have to help accommodate the other side by understanding that they're different from you.
right. Yeah. And
Uh,
now women are getting ahead of men from a career point of view because they've been brought into the, economy, in terms of women's rights and all that kind of stuff. So there's now a secondary problem developing with men who are kind of being left behind.
in what way?
Education, economics. Uh,
What's the change that happened that made women start excelling past men, and excelling in what way?
well, first of all, women didn't used to go to college. They would be homemakers. So I'm talking in the last 50 years. They weren't doctors, they weren't lawyers, So they're moving ahead in this, and it's just, I mean, there's a lot of research and studies on it. So um, I guess part of it is, there's more competition. It's, women are taking jobs that used to be only there for men.
Yeah. I have a cousin of mine who's a highly successful lawyer. She's surpassed almost every man in the firm, and she's doing extremely well.
Right. I'll bet. Right.
You mentioned earlier that when you were referring to developmental trauma, that when you become an adult, you have the brain that you have. At what point is your brain mostly developed?
Well, the neurobiology is kind of completed around 25,
Okay.
somewhere in that range. Um, but the brain does change, so it's subject to getting worse. The brain doesn't evaluate what it's being told by us, by ourselves. So if we keep saying, "Oh, I'm a piece of crap," and I'm no good, well, the brain just keeps strengthening that wiring in the brain, so it gets repeated and repeated and reinforced. So these negative self-beliefs, these are false beliefs, but they're beliefs nonetheless. And then those kinds of negative beliefs cause problems at work for that people, or in pursuing their dreams or their beliefs, or able to maintain or develop relationships, romantic relationships.
It seems like a common problem. I know I'm guilty of it as well as speaking poorly towards myself, to myself.
Yeah.
And I know we start to believe it. I heard somebody say one time that that voice in your head that's saying negative things was put there by somebody else. I wonder if you agree with that.
It certainly can have been put there by somebody else, but if a child isn't getting what they need, or is getting something they don't need, like, somebody's being mean to them, or, being inappropriate, um, the child will never blame the caretaker. And for the obvious reason that you need the caretaker for food and survival. So
Mm-hmm.
you can't safely turn against that person. So who's that leave to blame?
Yourself.
Right. Yeah. And that's what 99.9% do. All of us, including myself. Yeah.
Yeah. So you think it's just by default, my life is bad. It has to be somebody's fault. And it's not a wise strategy to put it on the person whose fault it probably is. So I'll take it myself.
Yes, exactly. But it's not thought that way. Children don't think the way you just said.
Mhm.
It's just it gets internalized. Oh my, it's not even in their awareness. They just start to believe that there must be something wrong with me. I'm defective, or I'm not good enough because I'm not chosen, or they're saying bad things to me, or somebody's telling me I'm stupid, or, you know, whatever, that kind of thing.
So in order to be, I'll just call it for now, healthier than that, you think you must have been given more consistent love and attention and affection at a young age.
And safety. Yeah. Well, and I think it's all the same thing. Yes. Well, yes, especially in the 0 to 6 range, where the brain is so, you know, busy with growing and doubling and wiring up.
Yeah, is that the 0 to 6? Is that the range that developmental trauma, the lens that you look through is focused on?
Yeah, well, generally, yeah. They're doing research at Columbia University where they are taking simultaneous video cameras of the baby's face and the mother's face, and they're breaking it down into 1/6 of a second to see the very subtle changes. And they're doing papers on this, and in ways that can predict what's going to happen in terms of that child's ability to have a connection.
They flash the image of the mother to the child.
No, the mother and child are talking to each other, are communicating, and there's a separate and simultaneous camera on each of their face.
Mhm.
So they can see within 1/6 of a second what is on the mother's face and what's on the child's face. And then they code what's happening to see. And what this is also called is something called attunement, which is really important in adult relationships, where we can notice what's happening in the other person, and the other person can notice what's happening in us, to achieve the ultimate goal that we all need, which is to be heard, known, and seen.
Hmm.
Um, and the children need that, but they can't ask for it. So their brain just adapts to whatever they're getting or not getting.
Would you say that's the primary thing that most people are looking for is to be heard, seen, and I'm was the third one
No,
loved?
heard, known, heard,
No.
seen, known. When you were talking to somebody, we want to feel like they they heard us and they know us and that they saw us. And that's at, you know, a level with somebody that we don't really care about that much, doesn't matter that much. But the more intimate the relationship, so the more it matters that we're heard, known, and seen. And when relationships go off the rails, adult relationships, it's usually related to somebody or both not feeling heard, known, and seen.
Hmm. There may also be another dilemma there where people guard themselves from being heard, seen, and known out of fear.
100%. Well, as I said in the beginning, it's so there. The biggest problem is the fear in the brain, because fear creates anxiety, and then that creates other sort of adaptations that undermine attunement between two people.
Mhm.
So you end up getting this or this. This is the attunement where both people feel heard, known, and seen.
Hmm. That's the goal there.
Yeah.
Yeah. You deal a lot with people with developmental trauma, which is the years 1 to 6. And it seems to me, please correct me if I'm wrong, in order to help solve these issues, you should revisit them. You should take a look at them and see if you can identify the problem so you can solve it. However, when things happen at that young of an age, oftentimes I know I can't remember many memories from that age. How can you solve a problem if they can't even remember what happened to them at that time?
Well, that's a really, really good question. And the answer is being worked on by many different people. There's a number of different methods of therapy. Um, and there's a really good book called The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know if you've heard of this.
Have.
Yeah, so that book has 7 chapters in the back of the book on treatment methods like EMDR, internal family systems, neurofeedback, um, uh, drama therapy, yoga. That can basically help people process um, these parts of themselves that they can't access. So, for example, um, internal family systems sort of believes that in that 0 to 6 phase, people develop like about 5 sub personalities that serve to protect them from whatever's going wrong. It might be, and then later in life, it can be other kinds of things, like people start to use drugs or alcohol to medicate their discomfort from that early childhood stuff. And that people aren't necessarily aware of it, but that most people who are using substances are using it to regulate a dysregulated nervous system.
I see. So internal family systems, they develop a few different personalities to help them cope, correct?
Yeah.
Um, do you think, and I know this may not be your area of specialty, do you think that that would be the extreme of where multiple personality disorder comes from?
It's really not related to multiple personality disorder, and multiple personality disorder is pretty rare.
Mhm.
It does exist. In this method, it's where these parts know each other.
Mhm.
Multiple personality disorder, the parts can not know that the other ones are there.
Got it. Well,
So this is a less severe. But it's a way to get at what you asked. Well, how do you get at stuff that developed in this 0 to 6 range when there are no memories?
and internal family systems is a way to do that.
Well, it can be. It's one of the ways. EMDR, which is, I don't know if you know what that is.
That'd be great if you could help explain.
Sure. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And what that is about is if somebody has a negative self-belief. Um, this is a method that uses bilateral stimulation. So it could be a light moving back and forth, or fingers, or a buzzer. It goes left, right, and enables the brain to make sense of something traumatic that happened. So when something traumatic happens to somebody, and this could be the early childhood stuff or later, the belief is it gets stuck in the right side of the brain in fragmented pieces, which it could be the image, a sound, a feeling, a belief, a body sensation. And EMDR enables the brain to sort of heal, take those fragments, put them in a form that they can be put into the past where it belongs. Because while they're there fragmented, it leaves the person feeling that that just happened. Whatever it might have been. It could have been, physical abuse, or as an adult could have been a sexual assault or a car accident or something like that.
And so the right side of the brain believes that this happened more recently than it actually did.
Yeah, because every night when we go to sleep, they believe during REM sleep, we take all the memories from the day and they get put on the conveyor belt, sort of into the storage system. But if there's a traumatic memory, it's stuck there. It can't get processed in REM sleep.
Is that why people feel anxious today, even though nothing's necessarily happening today? They still believe they're in danger when they are no longer?
Yeah. Or yes, right. Yeah. Or there's a danger, like fear of abandonment is a really big one. It's sort of, you could think about loneliness. So the feelings of loneliness evolved again through our evolution to drive us back into the tribe, because people who didn't return to the tribe, 50,000 years ago or even 10,000 years ago, probably wouldn't survive. And so right now, we have the same emotional feelings, but we're not, there's no, we generally you survive. If you're alone, you can still survive in our society, in our world, but people can still have that very painful feeling of loneliness, and or fear, or the related fear of being abandoned by their partner. Oh,
Mm.
you don't love me anymore, or you don't love me, or you never loved me, or whatever. And
Mm.
that's a horrific feeling. And then people do crazy things because they have that fear.
Yeah. No,
And
that
it
makes sense.
feels very dangerous.
It seems to me, as far as I can tell so far, some of the happiest times in my life were um drawn from connection with other people. And it just speaks to your point earlier about being seen and heard and known.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you help um define what trauma is?
Uh, yeah. Trauma is something that then is an event or an experience. Uh, so developmental trauma can be individual experiences, but it's also repetitive over time. So, for example, calling somebody stupid, like every day, or throughout over the years of their childhood, and um, so in adulthood, it would be something that overwhelms our nervous system that we can't overcome easily. Um, so there are traumas that we can overcome and the ones that we can't. So, for example, you could see a picture of a horse or an animal being attacked by a lion at a water hole. And the animals will shake it off, so they can physically shake off the trauma and then go back to drinking water, even though
Mm.
they're a life-threatening situation. So, and some of us can do that, if we have a nurturing system, if we have ways to do that, or we have somebody that we can talk to about what just happened to us
Mhm.
in a supportive way. But many people don't have that, um, or didn't have what they needed to talk about it, or they couldn't talk about it. it might have been too painful to bring up. So so it's basically things that overwhelm the nervous system in a way, and some can be resolved quickly if there's support systems, and if there aren't, then they can kind of get stuck in the brain.
Do you think it refers more trauma? Do you think it refers more to the event that caused the trauma, or do you think that trauma refers more to the response to the event?
No, the trauma is what caused the situation that was overwhelming to the person.
Mhm.
The car accident or the treatment by a parent, or a stranger.
Okay. And you mentioned that it's important to have somebody who's there for you, who can listen to you, that you can express and they'll understand.
Right.
Do you think that it's possible for people who might not have that person to be that person for themselves? Would that be sufficient, or is it important to have somebody else?
It's probably important to have somebody else, because if your nervous system is overwhelmed, you're going to have a hard time doing self-care unless you're like exceptional, like meditator, or you've done a lot of work on yourself. You might be able to, but depending on the severity of the trauma, it's probably good to have like a close friend or family member that you really trust, that you can get support from.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, it seems to me, as somebody with no experience in psychology, that many people have the issue of anxiety. It seems to me that it's the most common, we'll continue to call it an issue for now because I don't know of a better word. But do you feel like that's consistent with your experience?
No, as I said in the beginning, I think anxiety is the biggest problem we have
Yeah.
in mental health, and that many of the other conditions, and I'm not ruling out that there aren't genetic conditions in mental health, but the vast majority of it, in my view, is dysregulation of the nervous system, which is the body and brain together,
Mm.
based on fear, that there's dangers around. Um, so a brain that is calm, the brain, first of all, the brain's always sampling the environment for survival. So a calm brain would be looking around, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. A fear-driven brain or hypervigilant brain would be going, what's that? What's that? What's that?
Yeah.
What's That's the difference.
Okay. And you say deregulation of the nervous system,
Dysregulation,
dysregulation of the nervous system.
right? Which
Um,
means that it's, the term homeostasis is like, it's kind of thing, everything's calm. We're like sitting in the yard and we're relaxing and we're ready to do anything. We're just in this calm state. And dysregulation is there's danger, so we're hyper vigilant and we're ready to go into fight or flight, or we're in fight or flight. We might be so dysregulated that we're already in fight or flight, which means that we're either running away or we're fighting, which is a survival mechanism that's built into our brains.
so is it fair to say that anxiety is the largest problem, but fear is at the foundation of that problem?
Yeah, anxiety is an emotion that evolved in humans to get us into fight or flight.
Hmm.
So, and the purpose is survival. So the body, it feels, and the brain, this limbic system that we have in this part of our brain, is records every single thing that was ever dangerous, and it's stupid. It doesn't notice that thing that happened to us at 3 is not dangerous to us at 30.
Hmm.
But it will trigger the system for fight or flight if that similar thing shows up.
So our brain still believes we're in danger, even when we are no longer in danger.
Right.
How do we convince ourselves or teach ourselves that we are no longer in danger?
Well, meditation, mindfulness training, those can be really helpful. So the job here is the limbic system's job is survival, and it's always kind of saying, okay, well, this is dangerous, watch out. And if something really bad happens, well, actually, this happens over time, right? You have an incident, and depending on the severity of the incident, the brain starts to the fight or flight system starts to disconnect the frontal cortex of the brain, which is the thinking part, because it doesn't want us thinking when it wants us to run away or to fight for survival.
Hmm.
I'll give you a really interesting example of that.
Please.
I was walking, I smelled smoke outside my house just a couple of years ago. And I thought maybe the neighbors had like a smoke pit barbecue kind of thing going, because it smelled like wood and like maybe they're ever. So anyway, I kept going upstairs, different windows, and I couldn't really see. So I have a porch that goes out that gives me a really good angle. So I went out there. It's a slider, screen door. It was just summer. I go out and I close the slider, and then I go to the end of the porch where is the farthest point, and I lean out to look over to see if I could see where the smoke was coming from. And I see these flames shooting up the whole side of the house. And I see butane, those 20-gallon butane tanks sitting right next to the fire.
Oh man.
I turned around and I ran into the screen. Literally bounced off it. And that's like my frontal cortex was completely shut off because of the fear. It was telling me to flee. Actually, I wanted to flee as called to the fire department, but that was the thought. But the rest of the system was just like turned off.
Yeah. So it seems like to agree that might be a good thing.
Well, yeah, maybe, but it depends on the circumstances. So, but the point is, to control the fight or flight is to notice there's an urge. The fight or flight system wants to turn off the connection to the frontal cortex. So when we get a thought like, she said something to me, oh, she doesn't love me anymore.
Mhm.
So that's an urge to might create an urge to fight or flight. And that's where we want to slow down and let the frontal cortex take over,
Mm.
even though the system is trying to not let us do that. Where we could say to ourselves, and this is where mindfulness comes in and meditation or yoga, to help us see that, oh, wait a minute, no, she's just tired.
Mm.
She loves me. It's okay. And then instead of snapping back at the person with a zinger or something, we'd say, yeah, that kind of hurt my feelings, or you still love me? Yeah, or whatever, would make sense. So that's letting the frontal cortex, that is really the big challenge we have, because we have these brains from 100,000 years ago, and we have these really smart frontal cortexes, but people frequently get lost in the fight or flight and never get to the frontal cortex.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, that's excellent. Um, so in terms of this is me attempting to marry some ideas. So meditation and mindfulness are helpful to solve anxiety because it will remind the fear that it doesn't need to be scared because it is bringing us, like when people talk about being in the present moment,
Yeah.
it will bring us to the present moment so we can actually analyze what's happening right now and determine if what happened in the past is actually still an issue or if it's no longer an issue.
Right. Well, that's where the frontal cortex comes in, right? So if you're doing mindfulness, you're practicing giving access to the frontal cortex, and you're letting, intrusive thoughts or other kinds of stuff that's floating around all of our brains, being able to notice it and still be able to have the frontal cortex be in control in a way, and to notice that, oh yeah, it's not really dangerous. It
Mm.
feels crappy. I feel lonely, or I feel rejected, but it doesn't mean I have to kill the person, even though I feel, I might feel rage.
And even if you are in a situation where, because that happens, people are in situations where they are actually in danger. I would say, even in those situations, it's still probably better to be thinking with your frontal cortex instead of just instinct, right?
Right. Absolutely. That's military training, actually, I believe. That's a big part of it. You have to stay in control and using your assessment skills, because if you just go into fight or flight, you could really, you reduce your chances of survival in a combat situation.
Hmm. What are some of the things, and I'm not sure if this is something you've looked into. What are some of the things that they try and teach people in the military to stay calm?
I actually don't. That's not my area.
Yeah, that's okay.
But if you talk to any veterans about combat training, they could explain that to you.
Sure.
It's
I,
a
I
key part.
I'm sorry.
It's a key part of their training.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Another question I had for you is some people will say that people can change, and some people can say that people don't change. I'm sure the truth lies somewhere in the middle, but my question is, to what degree can people change?
I think is very rare that people can change, cannot. I think most people can change. But if you, for example, have gotten addicted to alcohol or some various kinds of other substances, you're going to really have to solve that first, before you get to what it is you're medicating. Generally speaking, because those substances are so disruptive to the nervous system. Um, I don't know. Does that answer your question, or was that what was your question?
To what degree can people change?
Yeah. So if they're substances, that's you're going to have to deal with that. Uh,
Hmm.
if it's about irritability, men in particular can get irritable and cranky, and that can be really alienating. And so that is relatively easy to change, because most men that I've worked with um, don't want to treat their significant others in a bad way or a mean way. Um, but they kind of get caught in fight or flight and in halt, which is hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And so there's a thing in our nervous systems called window of tolerance. And that's the area in which we can handle incoming, you know, emotions, thoughts, confrontations, discussions, without going into fight or flight. We can stay in what we call receptivity without going into reactivity, which is fight or flight.
You said
That
that, sorry.
that window of tolerance is shrunken by hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and it can get very, very small. And if you have a very small window of tolerance, you're going to be really irritable and cranky, and everything's going to piss you off. So in that situation, what you want to have is with your partner to be able to say, have an agreement, oh, how was your day, honey? And you want to say something bad, but what you would want to say in that situation is, I really am exhausted and starving. Can I talk to you about that after I, you know, take a nap, or after I get something to eat or something like that? So it's basically paying attention to our nervous systems. These are bodies, and they need fuel, and they need sleep, and that kind of stuff. So it affects how we function if we're not getting that.
Yeah. So that's it. That seems like such a simple, easy solve for somebody who's grumpy too.
Well, yeah, but you have to remember it.
Yeah.
And or you have to have a conversation with your partner where you say, I really don't want to treat you like that. So can we come up with a solution where you can help me with that?
Yeah, simply communicating it, but you have to be aware of it yourself first, which is
That's
also
right. That's where the mindfulness comes in, right?
yeah.
Right.
I've seen like funny memes on the internet. It'll be like a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and the girlfriend's like all angry at the boyfriend, and then the boyfriend gives her food, and then she's like dancing, she's all happy.
Right. Right.
Um,
That's halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired.
yeah. Um, Another question that I had, and this is a larger one, I guess just so the question is from your perspective, what is the goal of therapy?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say the goal is generally to maximize the individual satisfaction with their life.
Hmm, that's a good goal.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you see people have a decent amount of progress with that?
Yeah, it's depending on the extent of the childhood trauma. Um, it can be slower going, take longer.
Without giving too many specifics, what is the largest leap of progress that you've seen in a person, and what was it that helped them to achieve that?
Well, actually, recently I'm seeing somebody who who've been doing a lot of the explanation stuff that you and I have just done,
Hmm.
and it just all clicked for her,
Hmm.
and it made so much sense, and she was suddenly able to um she was having like really big emotional reactions at work. She was having a really hard time with what the work she was doing and the people she was working with, and it just all sort of snapped into place for her. It's like, so I've not seen that happen. That's very rare. But it was like, wow.
Um, how long have you been seeing her?
Um 3 weeks, three times, maybe 3 or 4 times.
Every 3 weeks?
No, like once a week over the last 3, 4 weeks.
Oh wow. And
Yeah.
it all just clicked. Do you feel like she understands most of the concepts that we've discussed today?
Yes, she's a medical professional.
Hmm.
So she knew about them. She just didn't put it together for herself.
Mm.
Um, but that's an unusual case. I don't see that very often.
That's good. And the thing that tells you she made a lot of progress, she's just feeling more comfortable and at peace with herself.
Yes, and making changes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Able to make changes. She's able to make changes and feels better about her work.
Okay, good. Um, a lot of people, I feel, hold the idea that they have to be striving for happiness. Now, it seems like that may not be the best target because it's unrealistic to be happy all the time. And even if you were happy all the time, you might be bored of it. What do you think that people should be striving for?
A satisfying life.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah. There's a great book on that. It's called Flourish.
Hmm.
And he makes the point that it's not about happiness because there's a whole psychology of happiness, and he's in that field, but he makes the point, and I can't think of his name, but the name of the book is Flourish. He makes the point that it's to be satisfied with our lives, which can go from sadness and grief to joy and ecstasy to just general day-to-day contentment.
Is it fair to say that a synonym for that would be to accept yourself, good or bad?
Yeah, yeah, it can be. Yeah. I mean, it's a part of it, the satisfying life, to accept yourself for sure.
Hmm. Um, this one's less philosophical and conceptual. It's really more for you. I'm curious what it's like on a day-to-day basis, not really knowing what you're stepping into with your clients. I mean, you're about to step into the deepest parts of their emotional life,
Right.
and you could be facing anything on that day. I'm wondering what that's like for you.
It's not easy, because I have hungry, angry, lonely, tired as well.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm trained to not let my stuff, as we say, get involved. And but yeah, it's real. It can be hard work. It takes a lot of energy to stay present for somebody, depending on what it is they're going through. And it can be difficult. And sometimes people can be annoyed with me about something. And it's important to be supportive to them, even when that's happening.
What state of mind are you aiming to be in to help receive these things the best?
Rested, right?
Mm.
And sort of rested and peaceful, yeah.
Yeah.
Mindful.
Uh,
Mindful of myself. I need to be mindful of where I'm at.
whenever, and this is not necessarily when you're in a session, just this is more just in general, but if you're, say you're in a confrontation with somebody, um, how can you help determine if the confrontation, you're like, say somebody's mad at you?
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for somebody to help them determine whether that's just that person having a bad day, putting it on you, just, or if maybe you've actually done something wrong?
Well, usually I probably have done something wrong, I would say, you know what it usually is related to attunement.
How
And
so?
maybe my window of tolerance is a little small. And they said something and I missed them. So I kind of was more like this. I didn't get exactly what they meant, or I didn't ask for clarification. I just made an assumption and I said something that they didn't like, or they felt, hurt their feelings or something like that.
Like you didn't hear them the way that they needed to be heard.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So that's attunement. Yeah.
Yeah. Got it.
And so that's it, just important to apologize. I'm sorry I missed that.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's pretty rewarding talking to all these people and seeing the progress along the way?
Yeah, I really enjoy it. Especially uh in this field of trauma, because it's like so exciting that all these new methods are being developed every day. Research is always coming out, like the attachment research at Columbia, or they're doing research in Canada on developmental trauma,
Hmm.
using fMRIs, really looking at the brain, what's happening. So it's a really exciting time, when there's a lot to learn, and lots of professional stuff to try to bring to bear, like in the toolbox, to put in my toolbox for this work.
That's cool. Are there any new concepts, philosophies that you've learned that like are recent that you're interested in?
Um,
I'm not even sure what an fMRI does.
oh, it's a functional MRI. It's you'd be under an MRI, but it's while you're doing something, so they can actually watch what's happening inside the brain,
Hmm.
where the blood's going, or what's lighting up in the brain. So you give the person a stimulus, and you can see what's actually happening. Um, or with people with developmental trauma, um, they can see, recent research is showing how their sense of self is linked to the sense of danger. That was amazing work that's going on right now
Hmm.
in the
Oh,
brain.
so the last thing I wanted to ask you, and we may have touched on it already, how would you define a fulfilled life? You might call it a satisfied life. And what do you think is the most important aspect to that fulfilling life, as far as you can tell?
I think it's really about relationships and love, really. It's not that complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
about, friends, family, um, that kinds of stuff.
Got it. Well, hey, Art, I appreciate your time and I appreciate you talking to me today. It's been very insightful.
Great. Nice to talk to you, Tony. Thank you for the interest and the questions.
Yeah, of course. Hope to speak again soon.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.